Great. I think that's working. All right. Hey everyone. It's good to be here again. It's the intimate premier group that we normally work with. So at some point or another, we've had chats. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing myself. You know, I'm a lawyer. Shuli Boy Mutiba, my business partner, is a chartered accountant. He's not here tonight, but you know, our job or our focus on property law is typically what we bring to the table, property tax and property law. And tonight's conversation is around installment sale agreements. Now, we had obviously conversations, must have been about 2 weeks ago, on installment sale agreements. So I started to now, in my mind, when I look at the public events, I do see a lot of people that are there, and maybe some people have questions that how to get into them. So now we're maybe going one step further. We're starting to ask more pertinent questions or more difficult questions. Maybe you've had some bad experience. It's not just about how do we get in it, it's how do we get out of it? How do we manage it? What are the real implications, the technical implications? So I decided to maybe address this almost as a part two to what we had previously discussed. The first one being vital information that everyone should know, and this one being more advanced information, basically the second part to the last time that we had a chat. So as per normal, we're applying the law to installment sale agreements. Obviously, again, this is a tool in the toolkit of an investor to take advantage of you know, what the law allows, and to take advantage of it and obviously profit from it. So this isn't this is basically learn the tools of your trade, and this happens to be one of the tools of the trade that can get you some really good returns, as Hiron's definitely going to let you guys know about. So some of these statements, it's either myths or questions, and I just phrased it as statements on some of the things that people in this industry that have already approached installment sale agreements are speaking about. So the first one is, the payment of a deposit is not a minimum legal requirement, albeit useful. So what we mean by this statement is there's a lot of uncertainty, even with normal OTPs, that when you make an offer on a property, you should probably make provision for a deposit. As Christian will advise you, the deposit really only becomes pertinent if there's a chance that you're not going to get 100% financing. So from a banking perspective or financing perspective, it makes sense to offer a deposit. You'll find some sellers, for example, want a deposit because it shows commitment, especially if you're buying really long time frames where you want long periods of due diligence or obtaining investor finance or whatever the case is. I, as a seller, would expect you to put some money down and get your skin in the game. So there's a time and place for a deposit, but it isn't a minimum legal requirement. Now, with installment sale agreements, it becomes more so in the sense that a person is now selling a property to you over a period of 12 months or more. Now, here they really want skin in the game. And a deal that we were involved in very recently, and it became quite a popular deal that we refer to quite a lot, is we managed to convince the desperate seller to sell the property, but we gave him an upfront 300,000 Rand, and then we actually deferred the rest of the payments long after the year. The next payment was only going to be due, I believe, in 18 months or something like that. That still falls in an installment sale agreement because it's still more than 12 months, and it's still more than several payments, but you've paid a deposit to keep him happy. You've now bought yourself 12 or 18 months, but as a purchaser, you still have the security that this thing is lodged at the deeds office and he cannot sell it without you knowing, as opposed to a normal OTP where maybe you're allowed to make two payments, the deposit and the final payment. But if you extend that over a period of 18 months, you lose that security because a lot can happen in 18 months and you don't have the deeds office on your side. So deposits or upfront payments are particularly useful, but not necessary. Second question. Both, or rather, the second statement, both the Alienation of Land Act and the contract governs breaches. So a lot of questions are around, oh, but what happens if the purchaser breaches? What happens if the seller changes their mind? What do we do? Do we lose our money? Do we lose our upfront payments? Do we lose our installments? So the problem with this is, and now especially in an advanced group, this isn't a question that I can really answer. Well, rather, I can answer it, but I can't. There is no standard answer to this. You contract for what you need to happen. If you're a seller and you want to contract for a forfeiture, put it in the contract. If you're a purchaser and you want to contract against forfeiting the monies that you've paid, put it in the contract. Make provision for some sort of refund if something goes wrong. Make provision for an exit. So the contract is very important. And obviously, typically, for the faster contracts, we've got set templates that we provide you guys with. But if you're particularly worried, or this is a special project, maybe let's give it a little bit more attention to make sure that you're covered and you don't lose your money at the risk of you knowing that you don't mind paying this, but you expect to receive it back. Now, obviously, bear in mind, half the times you're paying this to the bank, so they're not going to be paying you back. And if the seller's desperate, they're not going to be paying you back. So be careful with things like that, because there is contracting for something, and then there's the practical application of that provision in a contract. And if you can't collect, you can't collect. So you can kick and scream as much as you want in a contract on how you're going to get all your money back. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen. So you also need to be like logical in your approach, that when you pay money in situations like this, half the time, the money's going to that specific seller. Insofar as breaches are concerned, just so you guys know, forfeiture is governed in our legislation. So if there is a contract that makes provision for some kind of row-up where the seller keeps all the monies that have been paid by a purchaser, there is remedies, because our legislator has found that to be somewhat unfair that a person can pay a 500,000 Rand deposit, and because of a breach within 1 month of the contract, certainly the seller can't claim to have really suffered 500,000 Rand worth of damages. So there is relief. It's special relief for situations like that where there are penalty clauses. So just keep that at the back of your mind. If you are a purchaser, you land up in a contract that makes provision for row-up, like 99% of contracts out there do. There are things that you can do to get your deposits back. Then early settlement of purchase price is an option. So that's just a cool, quick one. For it to be an installment sale agreement, needs to be over a period of 12 months, like beyond 12 months. If you settle within 12 months, perfectly fine. As long as it's defined as installment sale agreement from the outset, you can register it at the deeds office, provided obviously you meet the requirements, like it's a residential property, etc., etc. But so you can get it registered as long as it's past 12 months, or sorry, the contract provides for a period longer than 12 months. If you want to settle it sooner, 100%. You want to on sale, go for it. You can do anything to settle early. It's actually a right that you have that the Alienation of Land Act does provide you with. Next one, commencement of renovations must be governed in the contract. This one's quite intuitive. So I don't, and it's not specific to installment sale agreements, but its uniqueness comes in the fact that you guys are holding onto this property and actually trying to make money from it, especially with multi-lets and like it being tenanted. So you are doing certain renovations and improvements and that sort of thing. Whereas with your normal OTPs, you've got the option of waiting for transfer before you do things like this. Here, typically, you'd want to do it because you're actually gaining or generating income. So that's why it plays to installment sale agreements a little bit more, but it's not unique. So the same rules apply. If you make an offer and you want to change certain structural things on the property, the seller's going to need to approve to this. They're going to need to approve. Maintenance and things like that, it's going to need to be in the contract. So if to a certain degree you're leasing the property and buying it at the same time, there needs to be a level of understanding on what your responsibility is versus what the seller's responsibility is. So just keep things like this in mind. The contract does need to provide for it. And the next point goes back to how much money can you spend on this property at the risk of something going wrong. Now, obviously, you've got some protection with the deeds office, so your risk is little, but whatever little risk does exist, just keep in mind that once you put the money in, you can make provision in the contract. And I've done it tons of times where in the contract, we specifically state that if certain improvements are made, we expect the seller, if he breaches and we have to cancel, to refund us the value of those improvements. And so you can contract for all of that if you need to. The question again is practically whether you'd actually ever be able to collect that. So just keep those practical elements in mind when trying to protect yourself contractually. Then, sorry, on that note, keep those elements in mind when trying to protect yourself contractually. So you, as a property investor, can use the contracts to your advantage. For example, you can go to court and force transfers into your name. And that's relatively easy because the seller doesn't have to come up with money or anything. You can force them. So there's certain things in contracts that are good for you that you can enforce, and certain things that you need to keep in mind are going to be difficult to enforce that you put in there for psychological advantage. So just know the difference between those two. Maybe one of the days we'll actually have a conversation about what clauses are more psychological and what clauses are actually practically enforceable. Investments by stock files and installment sales. This is a really cool one and kind of ties into what Huron's going to chat about. So it's interesting notion, but I mean, the bottom line is, as one would with an installment sale with a normal OTP, one can with installment sale agreement. So just bear that in mind. It's just a different strategy, but whoever can approach one can approach the other. Now, stock files typically can't buy properties, especially in like your typical informal infrastructure that exists around stock files. But like I've told many people, stock files can actually be structured within the confines of what our system allows in order for it to be juristic people. So you could just stockfile in a company, you can do a deal with a company and a stockfile, plenty of things that we can structure around stockfiles. That's not the point of this conversation. But whether a stockfile in a good structure, done well, can invest in installment sales, absolutely, why not? And it's a brilliant way of doing it because typically you find that stockfiles are sometimes investing in piecemeal, little by little, month by month. So if for some reason there's some issue in obtaining finance and they can't buy a property outright, they could contribute those small payments together in order to be able to afford the installments in, for example, an event of the owner of the property, the tenant that you put on this property defaulting and you're not getting the rent or whatever the case is. Then last but not least, the use of installment sales and asset transfers. So this kind of deviates from what I've just spoken about before. So everything I've spoken about before, tools of a property investor for wealth creation. This is a tool of a property investor for wealth preservation. So this is, what do you do with installment sales that can actually help you within your estate planning? And this is something that Shilly Boy and myself are actually working on. I have to give him credit for this. He's doing an example now, and this was actually his idea. The movement of properties, which we've done before in different circumstances, but this particular idea is the movement of a property from a person's personal name into a trust. And then, well, if memory serves me correct, into a company that's owned by a trust, and then the movement of the shares around this. So it does get obviously slightly complicated. There's a lot of thought behind it and how these shares actually get transferred eventually and how long one can actually do this for in order to avoid payment of unnecessary tax and that sort of thing. So it's still in the testing phase, but it is something that we've done previously in other forms and that we're looking at now. So it's just interesting. If anyone's sitting with properties in their personal names and they're worried about how much they're going to pay if they try and transfer it now, remember with installment sales, you can roll over capital gains, like Shilly Boy explained the last time. And by using it to transfer the property, you can also get into a situation where you can move the shares across. But yeah, that's, like I said, more complex. So that's a topic for another day for the whole period. So yeah, that's it from me. I hope that was helpful. I just thought that was a bit more of an advanced feature. But yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Great stuff, Bruno. Thank you so much. Always very informative. Some very interesting topics there. I'm sure we'll have a chat in Discord afterwards. Ladies and gents, just a reminder of the Q&A tab. So please do ask questions in the Q&A tab after our keynote speaker here in front of Vestas, and we will be answering your questions. So please do post questions in the Q&A tab. Now, if you want to get hold of Bruno Samar, please go to joinsapin.com/BSA. And you can then connect directly with Bruno Samar, and I know his team will be on Discord afterwards. So without further ado, ladies and gents, we are now going to get to our keynote speaker, the expert in installment sales, what we've all been waiting for. Once again, the Q&A tabs there, ask any questions you might like. Jeroen, are you there?